It's part of the joint programming we do with the library. And in the course of not only this program, but over the years, we have had two main shared programs, the interfaith panels, where we address various topics with a representative from each of the traditions participating, and then this new series, Ask Whomsoever, in an effort to provide some in-depth understanding of the faith tradition that is represented. The next event for the panel discussion, I believe, is November the 21st, and the subject is mental health. Mark, does that correspond? Okay, thank you, with what we are planning. I would also say that at our last ministerium meeting, we began to discuss what topics we would like to have in the new year following January. And I would suggest that if there are topics that you folks would be interested in, you would either speak to Mark, the library representative, or Rabbi Barbara Simons, who will be here later, or you can use one of those cards to write a topic down. I cannot promise you that we will be able to do every topic, but I can assure you we will take them into consideration. The next event like this will be on the first Thursday in November, November 7th, and I'm not sure who will be represented in that, but I think you can see advertising in your various places of worship and in the library. Normally, a member of the library staff presides here. She was unable to be present this evening, so I have stepped in to take her place. My name is David Morse, and I am a member of the Monroeville Interfaith Ministerium. I might also say that if you are interested in seeing again, or have a friend who might be interested in either the panel or the Ask a Religious Leader program, these are available on YouTube. And I want to thank our technical guru, Pastor Bob Schaefer from the Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, who is responsible for that. You can go to YouTube, and in the search engine, you search Monroeville Interfaith Ministerium, and these programs will come up. I also have two other announcements. We have some Monroeville Interfaith Ministerium pens that you're welcome to have. You can see Pastor Bob after the meeting. And also there is a program of remembrance to remember the tragic events at the Tree of Life Synagogue. This is a program that Temple David is sponsoring that will occur Saturday evening, October 26, 2019. And there are flyers advertising that program here. Please feel free to take those and advertise them in your various places of worship and other venues. This evening, our topic is Islam, and I'm very happy to introduce to you my colleague in the ministerium, the Imam AbudulAziz Suraqah. Imam Suraqah is the Imam at the Monroeville Community Center of Greater Pittsburgh, the Muslim Community Center of Greater Pittsburgh, here in Monroeville. He is a recognized scholar in Islam, and has been an asset to our community since I've gotten to know him, and an active member of our ministerium. The format for this evening will be the Imam will make an opening presentation dealing with the highlights of Islam, and then in order to give everyone an opportunity, we've passed out some cards. If during his presentation there is a question or two that he has sparked, we would ask you to write those. Since I'll be reading them and passing them on to him, please write them as legibly as you can, taking into account my old eyes. And then if there is sufficient time, we hope to wrap up around 8:30. We get through the questions. We will then open it to any general questions from the audience and proceed from there. Again, I thank all of you for being with us. And without taking any more of his time, Imam, please present.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for coming. We're used to the panel discussions where each of us gets 5 minutes to talk. So this is very different in that I have all the time I need. Oftentimes in the panel discussions, we get 5 minutes and we feel really rushed because there's so much we'd like to say that we have to condense into those 5 minutes. So I was thinking in the beginning just to speak for however long giving a very brief overview about Islam and what Islam is. And that's more challenging than many might think, because Islam, like other faith traditions, is very, very vast, both as a faith, a doctrine and practice and culture and civilization. So we say that Islam is a religion out of convenience. But what does it mean when we say that Islam or any other faith is a quote-unquote religion? The word in Latin for religion, there's some dispute about its origin, but some say that it means that which binds, or that which gives you a code of life. And to explain the meaning of Islam, it's really helpful to go to the language in which this religion, for lack of better words, was revealed, the religious scripture of Islam, the Quran. The Quran was revealed in the Arabic language, which means that it is a sacred language for us, and it also gives us those terms that we can understand to have a better appreciation of what it is. The word Islam is Arabic from the word salima, to be safe and sound and whole, to be safe in a state of peace. But the word religion is something else. The word religion in Arabic is deen, and it doesn't exactly translate as religion, because the word deen literally means your way of being. And according to the Quran, the deen of God is that of being in loving surrender to Him. And it applies to human beings, and it applies to the angels, it applies to the animal kingdom, it applies to everything in creation. So using that word deen, which means way of life, way of being in conformity with the divine, we can't really translate it as religion unless we want to say that bees have a religion and that lions and goats have a religion. We don't say that, but we say they have a deen, which is a natural way of being as God intended for them to be, serving God in that particular role He created them in. So the word deen is religion in a very kind of liberal sense. It means a way of life. But Islam as a word means submission and surrender, loving submission of your body, mind, and soul to the Creator of the heavens and the earth, following the sublime teachings that are explained in what we believe to be the final divine communication to human beings called the Quran. And in Arabic, the Quran literally means the unifying scripture, because it articulates the universal message of all of the prophets that were sent by God to humanity, those we know among the biblical prophets, as well as those prophets we have no knowledge of. Because in the Quran, God says that there's not a single community, a single nation, except that a messenger, a prophet was sent among them to guide them to high ethics and to remind them of God. And for us, this means that the Native Americans and their various tribes and groups, they had prophets. We just don't know who they are. It means that every single culture and ethnic group had prophets speaking to them in their language, communicating the divine will, how to live, what one should believe, reminding them of their connection to God. And the Quran is that encompassing scripture that distills and clarifies those truths that existed with all of the revealed scriptures and with all of the prophets, that those we know and those that we don't know. So, in terms of the greatest or most overarching message of Islam, that is the truth that God is real, and that God is neither man nor woman, neither black nor white, neither a spirit nor a body, does not exist in space-time nor outside of it. He is unique, He is eternal, He is everlasting, He is all-knowing, He is almighty, He's just and loving and merciful, and independent of time and space and all imperfections. He's the absolute. So in Arabic, the word we use for God is Allah. And that's an Arabic word that means literally the one who is served in devotion as the absolute being, the divine. And it's not a different God. When we say in English God, it's the same God. Because God, by definition, is the supreme being. Whether it's in German or French or Spanish or English or Arabic or whatever language describes the supreme being, that's God. So languages, they have their limitations, but they all speak to that same transcendent divine reality. We don't believe that Christians have a God and Muslims have a different God and Jews have a different God. God is God, the divine, the supreme being. So he's absolutely distinct from creation and unlike creation, yet at the same time, the divine is closer to us than our own being, our own consciousness. And because of this, only God is deserving of our unwavering and unconditional allegiance, love, devotion, and adoration. So Islam, as we said, linguistically means to surrender or submit in a loving relationship. The root of it also indicates peace and safety. So it's a way of saying that you enter into a state of inner peace through willingly surrendering yourself to the will of the Creator. We believe that that is the unifying message of all of the prophets and sages throughout history. All of them came with that same essential message. You know, we look in the history of the biblical prophets and those biblical figures. We have Adam, we have Abraham, we have Noah. We have many prophetic figures in the Bible that we believe in. And if we ask ourselves, well, what was their religion? We can't pinpoint it and say, oh, their religion was Judaism, Christianity, or Islam as it is defined today. What was the religion of Adam? Did he have a religion? If we mean organized religion, no. But if we mean a way of connecting with the divine and having revealed to him messages from the divine, well, his religion was that relationship between him and God and that knowing of God. That is, for us, the general meaning of Islam. And then you have the historical, specific Islam with the capital I, which is the Islam that is revealed in the Quran and has certain laws and ethics and a history and a civilization behind it. So, as Muslims, we believe in all of the prophets, those we know and don't know. We believe that when it concerns the divine, the God, Allah is the one who brings everything into existence, and that everything that has a beginning, whether it is a physical object, whether it's an action or a thought, all of these things must have been brought into existence and are therefore a creation. And because it's a creation, it didn't always exist, which means that it is in need. Everything besides God is in need. Everything is inherently needy because it has a beginning and an end, and it needs God for its existence. So only God alone exists without a beginning and without an end. He doesn't need anything, and we need him. And when we use the word him, because we have gendered language, we don't believe that God is a he or a she or even a neuter. We don't believe that those terms apply to God, but in the limitation of language, gendered language, we say he, but we don't believe in gender with respect to the divine. The attributes of the Creator, God, do not resemble the creation because his attributes don't have a beginning and an end. And we believe that he has the attribute of absolute oneness, in that he doesn't have a partner, he doesn't have an equal, he doesn't have a part, and he has no resemblance to anything of creation, which means we don't believe that there are partners with God that should be served in worship. We honor the prophets, we honor the sages, we honor pious people, but we don't worship anything in creation because everything is needy. And nothing deserves that kind of adoration and worship, only the Creator of the heavens and the earth. So there are a lot of things to say, regarding the theology, but In the basic structure of our faith, Islam, well, when we use the word faith, we're talking about languages here. Faith, we often use the word faith and use it as it's a, kind of, I hope and I believe it's so, but I don't really know. I'm trusting that that's true. That's not what we mean by faith. We mean certainty. Just as we're certain that 1 + 1 = 2, as a first principle, God is one, and God alone deserves worship. That's what we mean by faith, as a conviction. The religion of Islam, this deen or faith, has beliefs, doctrine, it has actions that we do, ritual worship, transactions with other human beings, and the spiritual, ethical component. And from that, you have a civilization, you have a people from different cultures and ethnicities and language who make up that tapestry of Islam. So Islam as faith, as a practice, as an ethic and spiritual tradition, you can liken it to a stream of clean water. And it takes the color and the shape of the bedrock or the ground over which it flows, the different colored rocks. Those are the cultures and the ethnic groups and the languages that express Islam in their own unique way based on the foundations of the faith. So you have, does anyone know the most populous Muslim country? Oh, you did your homework. Indonesia. A lot of people think that Islam is an Arab religion. It's not an Arab religion. We believe it's a human religion. Indonesia is the most populous Muslim country in the world, and most of them don't speak Arabic. So the majority of Muslims are not actually Arab. Arabs are actually a minority, even though the scripture of Islam, the Quran, has been transmitted and revealed in the Arabic language, and Muslims the world over, if they aspire to a higher degree of understanding, they will at some point have to learn Arabic, especially if they seek Islamic scholarship. In our religion of Islam, we have pillars of practice and pillars of belief and pillars of ethics and spirituality. And this is described in a very lengthy tradition in Islam. We don't really have time to go over it, but it describes Islam as consisting of 5 pillars. Now, these 5 pillars represent the chief or the main outward rituals that Muslims do. One of them is actually a verbal statement. That is an expression of a conviction in the heart. And that is when a person becomes a Muslim or affirms their Islam, they say, they bear witness, they testify that there is no God, there is no supreme being, no absolute, except the absolute God. And that his final messenger, Muhammad, was his final prophet and messenger. Expressing that makes one a Muslim because it's an expression of conviction. After that, you have the other pillars, which are actions. The second pillar is therefore the 5 daily prayers. The prayers in the morning, in the afternoon, in the late noon, at sunset, and later in the night. These are 5 prayers, and these are ritual prayers. Sometimes people will say, when they hear about 5 prayers, you only pray 5 times a day? I pray all the time. And that's not what we mean. When we say 5 prayers, we mean 5 ritual prayers that have a very specific way they're performed, with ritual washing beforehand, with ritual movements and specific things that we say, prayers in the bowing and prostration postures of the prayer. The other type of prayer, the supplicatory prayer, where a person holds their hands in different ways and prays to God, you can do that at any time. And indeed, Muslims pray all the time by that definition. We have prayers that we say before we go into the restroom, and when we get into a car, or when we eat food, when we're asking God for help and thanking Him for all the things that we have in our life. So we have both prayers, but the 5 ritual prayers they punctuate our day so that every moment in our life is punctuated by the remembrance of God. The third pillar of Islam is to pay charity, a certain type of charity. And You have voluntary charity that you can give any time you want, any amount that you want, to whomever you want. In Islam, that would be called sadaqah, and that matches the Hebrew word for charity. The other word, zakat, is the third pillar of Islam, and that's a percentage, 2.5% of your surplus income once it's reached a certain threshold. And it can be very technical because it applies to wealth, not just cash, or it could apply to jewelry and crops and livestock and things like that. That's to be distributed to the poor and the needy, those who are in debt for legitimate reasons, not widescreen TVs or things like that, for different recipients. And that is the act of worship involving our money, the financial act of worship. Serving God by paying something of our money to purify the rest of our money and to help those in need. The fourth pillar of Islam, in terms of outward practice, is fasting in the lunar month of Ramadan. We have a lunar calendar, and that's why you'll find Muslims fasting in the summer over a few years, and eventually it becomes fasting in the spring until it gets very easy and you fast in the winter time. And we fast from before sunup to sunset, abstaining from food, drink, sexual relations, smoking if someone smokes, taking anything into the body like that. Ideally fasting also from backbiting, lying, slander, gossip, or fasting with the eyes and ears from other things too. The fifth pillar of Islam is to perform the pilgrimage to Mecca, taking that journey to the sacred house, the first temple / mosque / place of worship dedicated to the worship of God, marking the rituals done by Prophet Abraham. That is to be done at least once in a person's lifetime, provided they have the financial means and they're able to make the journey safely. There are a lot of Muslims who don't ever get to make Hajj, either because they don't have the means, or as they were trying to get the means, they died. Some people, they make Hajj at the very last moments of their life. Some people make it when they're young. In this day and age, even with airplanes and with crowd control, Hajj is still a very arduous, difficult experience. And it's very powerful because it's almost like a dress rehearsal for the day of judgment when human beings will stand before the divine. So it's almost a dress rehearsal practicing that. These represent the very essential key outward aspects of the faith. There are other actions that we do, but those are the main ones. In terms of the doctrine or the faith, what we believe, I spoke a bit about that regarding belief in God, but we have other pillars of belief too, and that is to believe in God, to believe in the messengers of God, the ones we know, the ones we don't, that they were divine envoys sent by God. The books, we believe in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Psalms, and scriptures that we may not have know about that were given to others. In a general sense, we believe that that has been a reality, that prophets have been given scriptures. We also believe in angels as beings created of light in an unseen realm that interact with ours. And we believe in the last day, that after this life that we're in now, we will die, and it's not the end of the road. It's not lights out. We are going to be brought back to life and will be judged. And there is a heaven, there is a hell. There's a very vivid description of these things in the Islamic tradition. And we also believe in divine decree, which is a very difficult concept to grasp because ultimately it's ungraspable, if that's a word, because it's a divine mystery. But basically it means that whatever happened to you in the past, no matter what you could have done, it was still going to happen because you couldn't have predicted it. If a acorn falls on your head, you had no way of knowing it was going to fall. And after it's happened, you can't take it back. It's basically believing, affirming that God knows all and that nothing is happening against his will, that there's no competition in creation where there's any power that can do something that he doesn't will for them to do. The ethical, spiritual dimension is to practice Islam as an outward faith with rituals and ethics, and to have conviction in those beliefs, and to cultivate manners, etiquettes, good character, and to worship God to a degree where the certainty is so crystal clear, it's as if you see God. Though you don't see God in this life, you interact with others and you worship God as though you see Him. So it's a high level of certainty that we seek to cultivate through the faith. So that's Islam in a nutshell. Speaking to the general aspect of Islam as not as a religion based in a specific time and place, but as a primordial kind of ancient path that all the prophets held to, and then the specific Islam that has with it certain laws and ethics and guidelines that was revealed in a certain time and place. Islam, again, is not an Arab religion. We see it as a universal religion because it speaks to the human being, not to any specific group among human beings. And that's that.
All right. Thank you, Imam Suraqah. If you have questions, please jot them down, and Pastor Bob will collect them. We'll go through them, and then we'll open it up. While you're doing that, I would like to exercise my prerogative as the moderator and begin by asking a very simple factual question that pertains to your second part, the actual religion of Islam. Very often in the media and other places, because Islam does not have an organized clergy like some other traditions, what would be the difference between terms like imam, ayatollah, sheikh, so forth, that are seen to be describing religious leaders?
Right. So we have a joke among Muslims. If someone says they don't like organized religion, we say, welcome to Islam, the most unorganized religion. Because we're not organized in the same way as, say, the Catholics or other religions would be. We don't have a clergy. And that can be a great boon or bane for us. The terms imam or sheikh or ayatullah, these terms, some of them have a basis within the scripture in that they're mentioned as words, but they're not official titles that have a specific religious sanction. Meaning, if a person calls himself an imam or a sheikh, these are terms used in Arabic, and they have general meanings in Arabic and specific meanings that may differ from place to place. In most of the Muslim world, where Muslims form the majority, an imam would be the one who leads the 5 daily prayers in a mosque. Because imam literally means the prayer leader, or the one leading. In general, it means leader, but in the specific usage, it means the one who leads the prayer. It can also refer to someone who has a certain rank of scholarship, where they're like a leader in their discipline. That could be Arabic grammar, that could be genealogy, that could be commentary on the Quran, it could be law, jurisprudence, whatever. If that person's a leader, they will be an imam. In North America, imam is often used to refer to anyone who's a community leader. You find that especially within the African American Muslim community that has had a presence in America since the first Africans were taken from West Africa, brought here as slaves. You had, I believe it was 35 to 40% of them were from the Senegambia and Muslim regions where Muslims were the majority in West Africa. So in the 1920s and 30s, when you had mosques popping up in America, and then later on in the 50s and 60s, the imam would be either the one leading the prayer or just the community leader, even if he's not leading the prayer consistently, but he's taking a leadership role. The other term, sheikh, well, in Arabic, the word sheikh means elder. That's literally what it means. And they say that in Arabic, a person is considered a youth until they reach the age of 40. And once they pass 40, they become a sheikh, which means an elder. And there's even a poem in Arabic that I like to quote because sometimes people call me Sheikh, and I'm a little bit above 40, but I don't agree with being an elder as such. There's a line of poetry, the meaning of it is, "You claimed me to be a sheikh, but a sheikh I am not. For a sheikh is the one who walks with a walking stick, and I have no walking stick." But sheikh as a religious term, if it is used as a religious term, it would mean a scholar. It's often abused because sometimes a person who's not really a scholar but who has some basic level of learning may be seen as others as learned, and they're not really that learned, and they're called a sheikh. So again, because we don't have the clear-cut hierarchy in religious leadership, a person can start a YouTube page, call themselves a sheikh, and unless you see their credentials, I mean, you could challenge that, but they'll get a following if people are willing to listen. The other term you asked about, ayatullah, has anyone heard that term before? If you've been around from like the 80s, you've heard that term. I was a child of the 80s, so I remember it. So ayatullah literally means the sign of God. And what that means is a prodigy, someone who's very, very learned. And that is a specific religious term used among a subset of the Muslim community. Because like other religions, we have different schisms and groups. The majority of the Muslims would be called Sunni Muslims. They make up the majority. That's orthodoxy. And you have another group that are called the Shia, and there are certain differences between the Sunnis and Shia, some of which are political, some of which are theological, some of which are based on practice. So they use that term ayatullah to refer to a prodigy, a person who has gone through their system of education, which I think is something like 12 years to become an ayatullah. I could be wrong there, but I know that the seminaries that they have where a person studies, it takes at least a dozen years to receive that kind of title where they have the authority to speak on behalf of the scholarly community.
All right, I have taken the liberty, except for the last three, to rank these in what I think are the softballs to the hardballs, and I accept responsibility for that. The first one I think is fairly easy. The question is, what does a typical service look like? Can anyone attend? And does one have to be a Muslim to visit a mosque?
Okay.
Just share those with you.
Yeah, I'm very visual, so I can see it again. So what does a typical service look like? So as Muslims, the mosque is a center of activity for us. When we pray 5 times a day, we don't have to pray in the mosque. We can pray anywhere as long as the place is clean. However, there's an extra virtue and reward for taking out the time to offer the prayer in the congregation within the mosque. So that could be any of the 5 prayers, any day of the week. The exception to that would be the Friday prayer, which would be, we don't have a Sabbath. So we have a Friday prayer, but it's not a Sabbath where you're discouraged or forbidden from working before or after it. It's a Friday service that is required for men, and it's not required for women, though they're welcome to attend. And it consists of 2 parts. The first part, and this is usually starting, for us it's 1:05 to be exact. It starts with a call to prayer, and the Imam or whoever's delivering the sermon will stand up and deliver a sermon, usually speaking about a general reminder about ethics, character, conduct, reminders about the Day of Judgment and the reality of life, something to enrich the person through that weekend and through the next week. After that sermon, there will be the actual prayer service, which is a shorter version of the typical prayer service of that time of the day on the other days of the week. So you would have 4 units of prayer at the afternoon time on any other day, but on the Friday prayer it will be 2. Almost as if the sermon counts for 2 and then you shorten it to 2. But it's not a real shortening. That's a typical Friday service. We also have services after Ramadan, When Ramadan is finished, we have a larger service called Eid. That's a celebration. You're supposed to come in your, festive clothing and, dress up, dress nicely, as the Brits say, look smart. And you celebrate with a communal prayer within the group and eating and drinking and being merry and celebrating, fasting for an entire month. We have a second one like that, a celebration that comes a few months later, which is commemorating the sacrifice of Abraham when he sacrificed the ram in place of sacrificing Ishmael. Though in the Christian tradition it would be Isaac. In some of the Muslims say Isaac too. There's a difference of opinion about that. That's also a kind of communal event, not typical, but it happens once a year. The second question, can anyone attend? Yes, anyone can attend. Anyone is welcome to hear the message and to participate and to be with us. Does one have to be a Muslim to visit a mosque? No, one doesn't have to be a Muslim to visit a mosque. There may be some regulations in different parts of the world where some may require or request people to be in the outer courtyard and not in the inner area of the mosque where people are praying. That could be for various reasons. I know in Morocco that's the case for most of the mosques, with a few exceptions. And that's because they get a lot of tourists and they don't want to have people just coming in. But if someone wants to come and visit, they're more than welcome to visit.
All right, this is, I guess, a type of interfaith question. What role does Mary play in the faith? There's a book on her in the Quran, but what sort of observances or ways of honoring her are in, I assume, the Muslim faith?
All right. This is a beautiful question. So Mary, in Arabic, her name is Maryam, and Mary is considered one of the most honored of God's creation because she is honored by Him, by God, to be the one who gave birth to one of the greatest prophets that we believe in. Muslims believe in Jesus. We affirm Jesus' message, and we believe that Jesus was born of a virgin birth. We believe that she was a sanctified and pure woman, and that she gave birth to Jesus in a miraculous way. In the Quranic account of her birth, there's actually an entire chapter, as you noted, called the chapter on Maryam, on Mary, and it gives the account of the birth of Jesus. It mentions in the account that when the labor pains began, she went and she sat beneath a date palm tree, and it was in the winter. So in the winter, dates aren't growing on the date palm tree. And the angel Gabriel came to her and inspired her, telling her to shake the tree. Now, there's two things here. Number one is winter, so there's no dates typically. They won't have dates growing in winter. And number two, even if there were dates, you're not going to get dates falling off a tree if you just do this, if you shake it. And that's if you're strong. What if you're in labor trying to do that? So she shakes the tree, and ripe, fresh dates fell from the tree, giving her sustenance. This was a miracle from God to her, honoring her. So we honor Mary as an archetypal woman, meaning she was representative of a certain type of woman, of a person of chastity and great honor and great service and devotion to God. Her story in the Quran doesn't start with the conception and the birth of Jesus. Her story starts in the Quran when she was a child. She was a child and she dedicated her life to serving God, and in that life, God protected her and preserved her. So we honor her in the Islamic faith. In terms of observances or ways of honoring her, we don't have any specific observances. There's no specific celebrations, but we'll often talk about her. We'll talk about her in connection with her son, Prophet Jesus, or we'll talk about her among other archetypical women mentioned in the Quran who were embodiments of faith and beauty and excellence. In fact, I'm being the way I am as this introvert who likes to plan way ahead of time. I actually have a sermon prepared about Jesus and Mary, and the message of Christmas centered on how they were versus the message of Christmas as, consumerism. I haven't yet written it, but I'm planning ahead, letting the ideas, marinate in my mind.
Okay, well, this is a good segue into a two-part question, and they're starting to get a little more complex theologically. Can you share with us the view toward women? Do they have any positions in the clergy role? And then, does God, quote, control evil, that is to say, allow bad things to happen?
Okay, so that second question is a whole class in itself. Theodicy is fun to talk about. Okay, so the first one, can you share with us the view towards women? Do they have any positions in the clergy role? As I said earlier, in Islam, we don't really have a clergy, which means that there's no official title for anyone who is assuming a role of scholarship. Nevertheless, we do have people who are sort of like clergy. Those could be people who are authorized to teach certain disciplines, Islamic sciences, whether it's law, commentary on the Quran, and so on, or to answer specific questions for specific needs. And that would be a person who does ifta or mufti. So a person may come to them and say, oh, I came to the group prayer late and I missed half of it. Well, what do I do? It's a fairly simple question, but if someone doesn't know, they will go to someone who's an imam, a sheikh, a qualified teacher who would answer the question. So because we don't have an organized clergy, there's nothing to say that it's limited to men and restricted for women. In the Islamic tradition, when we look at the history of scholarship and how the religion was preserved, the preservation of the Quran, its memorization and understanding, the preservation of the sayings and recorded actions of the Prophet Muhammad, and the discussions regarding law and practice, you find that one of the greatest scholars in the history of Islam was Aisha, his wife. And throughout history, you have thousands and thousands of female scholars in the Islamic tradition. One contemporary scholar has a 40-volume collection of biographies just on the female scholars throughout history who transmitted narrations from the Prophet Muhammad. Thousands. And you still have those teachers today. So there's nothing to limit the role of women in serving through education. And when we say the view towards women is that ontologically, as creations of God, women and men are absolutely equal. In terms of roles in Islamic ethics, we do distinguish between equality and equity in roles. It all depends on the person, their place in life, the role that they have. So that's a long conversation. But in terms of women and men in the sight of God, they are creations of God on equal standing. Both of them are independently judged by God. Both of them are rewarded by God. Both of them serve God as God has instructed us in the Quran. The question of theodicy.
Yes, the theodicy.
Okay. So does God control evil or allow bad things to happen? So the question of theodicy is, theodicy is the question of evil, which is why does God allow bad things to happen to people or things? In the Islamic tradition, in our theology, we didn't really have to wrestle with that question as much as the Christians did. And there are a lot of historical reasons for that, to go back to the Renaissance and different questions of theology. So, but that doesn't mean that we don't have answers to that and it hasn't been explored. It just hasn't been given as much attention in our theology as it has in other faith traditions. So we strive for accuracy when we talk about matters pertaining to the divine. We don't believe, for example, I remember many years ago when I was living in Canada, there was an earthquake And one of the religious leaders in Canada said something to the effect that, God doesn't have any control over these things. They just happen, and we have no answer for them, which was a very deist way of looking at things. The idea that God created the world like a wind-up clock. Created it and left it on its own devices, and everything happens on its own, and that He is not involved directly with creation. Muslims are not deists. We believe that God is intimately involved at every moment, in every atom of existence. The fact that we're sitting here right now, and continuing to exist moment after moment is because of God perpetually sustaining our existence. This means that there's no world or no thing happening that is outside of the power of God. This means that nothing is happening that is against His will. But we have to be careful with language, because when we say against, we say that there's basically two levels to this. So on one level, does God will for there to be certain bad things to happen to people? Yes, in the big picture, God wills everything. Now, is God pleased with those actions of oppression or harm? No. Right? Does God will for Satan to exist? Yes. Satan is not a partner with God where they're battling it out and one can possibly win. He's under complete control. He has no power except the power that God gives him. But is he pleased with the actions of Satan in our tradition, and as well as others? No. So control, we could say yes, but we have to be careful in how we say that, because it could give the impression that it's actively orchestrated in a way that ascribes to God ill intent, malefic intent, and evil. And evil is not ascribed to God. When I simplify this for children, I give them an example by saying that oftentimes bad things are happening, and in the greater scheme of things, it actually plays out for the greater good that person may not be aware of. Much like a child who is suffering a cold, and their parents give them a really nasty tasting cough syrup. And to the child, that's evil, that's just horrible, why would you do that? They can't stand the taste of cough syrup. But in the wise view of the parents, they know that that is required for their specific condition in that particular time, and they need to take it, right? So theodicy is a really complex issue, because we also want to look at what are many of the possible wisdoms behind certain things that happen that we perceive as evil. Now, often atheists will use the argument of evil to disprove God, but that's kind of like putting your eggs, or what's the term,
comparing apples to oranges, putting your
apples to oranges, put all your eggs in one basket, yeah. Right? Because when you say evil, you're presuming, okay, who said it's evil, right? In atheism, the belief that there is no divine being, and therefore, what do you ground your ethics on? Why is it evil? How can it be evil if there's nothing to ground one's morals? So it's kind of cherry picking here to say that, oh, this is evil. But if you're atheist, where's that grounded? Who decides that that's evil? And it becomes a question of ethics, and it becomes very philosophical.
Okay, well, you good job. You have a two-part question here, part one of which you have at least alluded to, and it goes as follows. Going back to the acorn story, are you saying Islam doesn't have a Lucifer or Satan? And then a fairly straightforward question. Why do some persons change their name after becoming Muslim?
Okay. I'll take the second one first, because that's the easier of the two. Right. Why do some change their name after becoming Islamic? Or, to be more accurate, after becoming Muslim? First of all, it's not required for anyone to change their name. If they decide to convert to Islam, they can retain their name provided the name, their original name, has a generally good meaning. If their name is Satan, they should change their name. If their name is Demon Boy, they should change their name. But if their name is any other ordinary name that has a good meaning, they don't have to change it. Many people do, and there's a lot of complex reasons, and maybe some not so complex reasons why they may choose to do that. For many converts to Islam, including myself, it was recognizing this great shift in understanding the nature of reality and a shift in your view of life. And many converts, not all, a lot of them before becoming Muslim were also somewhat countercultural. That also explains the name change. For our African American brothers and sisters, sometimes it has to do with getting away from what they would associate with a slave name. They want to disassociate with that and take on a name that is more representative of their African heritage, which they feel is Islamic, based on the number of Muslims that were taken here in chattel slavery. But it's not required. I know some people who changed their name when becoming Muslim, and a few years down the road, they said, you know, I don't have to do this. I'm just going to go back to my old name. And that's completely fine. And I use my legal name interchangeably. If a person has a hard time pronouncing AbudulAziz, I'll just say, call me Jason. It's not an issue.
It's easier to remember.
Right? I don't look at it as a dual identity. You know, and maybe some people who are struggling with their identity may do that. And as they grow and mature in the faith, hopefully they'll come to a greater appreciation of the name their parents gave them. I appreciate that name, right? My mother, she calls me both names, depending on if I'm listening or not, right? If it's serious, she calls me Jason. So, going to the second question, are you saying Islam doesn't have a Lucifer or Satan? Definitely not. We do believe in Satan. Not only Satan, but Satans in the plural. We, in the Islamic tradition, we don't believe that Satan was a fallen angel. Now that belief did exist among some theologians in Islamic history, so it's not unheard of. But the majority position of Muslim theologians is that Satan was not an angel or a human being, but was rather a third type of creation that we call jinn. If you've seen I Dream of Genie, genie comes from the word jinn. And jinn literally means something that's unseen and hidden. One could call it a sprite. If you look up the old English word for sprite, that would be like a fairy or an unseen creature. A jinn is a creature created by God, and they are unseen by human beings. They're not angels, though. Angels are created from light. Jinn are created from a smokeless fire. Human beings are created from water, dust, earth, and form. And jinn are accountable. They are accountable, and they have some, perhaps, limited interaction with human beings. So we believe that he was one of those, and that he was a servant of God, along with the angels, in the company of the angels, for eons. We don't even know how long, serving God. And when God created Adam, he told, we call him Iblis or Shaitan, to prostrate to Adam, to bow to Adam. Now that bowing wasn't out of worship, it was out of honoring Adam and the descendants that were going to emerge from Adam, from his progeny and seed. Now, in the Quranic account, Satan or Iblis or Lucifer was worshiping God in the company of the angels for so long that he began to rely on that devotion, and pride entered into him, as well as jealousy and envy. And when he was told to honor Adam, his jealousy, his envy, his pride got the best of him, and he refused. He refused to honor Adam, which was basically his way of saying, no, I want to worship God on my own terms. And because of that, he faced the consequence of being expelled from that divine presence in the company of the angels. And out of his jealousy, he swore to try to lead human beings astray, out of jealousy, out of spite. So there's a wisdom behind the creation of Satan. There really is. We don't believe in dualism, that Lucifer and God are on an equal level and that they're battling it out with each other. He is a weak and needy creation of God. As one scholar 1,000 years ago said, he is the dirty rag of God. And filth and all sorts of nastiness is wiped up because of him. Now, one of the scholars mentioned a list of possible wisdoms behind the creation of Satan. And one of the wisdoms he mentions has to do with Adam eating from the tree. Now, it gets complicated because in Islam we don't believe that prophets are sinful. We believe that prophets are infallible. So we don't call the action of Adam a sin as such, but it was forgetfulness. And Satan told Adam to eat from this tree even though he was forbidden from it. And he was given a reason for doing so. And Adam, having not dealt with lying people, he had a good opinion and had trust. There was a certain naivety to that. And he ate from this tree and faced the consequence of it. And in that, coming to the earth, he sought forgiveness of God, not for the sin per se, but for the, maybe we could say, negligence and forgetfulness. And in seeking forgiveness, and in human beings being on earth and dealing with the challenges of earth, we learn that God is forgiving. We learn that God is compassionate and that he pardons us when we err. If that never happened, if Satan never whispered to him and suggested that, there would have been no sin. And there would be no knowledge among human beings about some of the beautiful names and qualities of God. That's one wisdom out of many. So, yes, we do believe in him, but we don't believe that he has ultimate authority to, inflict people with disease or to physically harm them. In fact, in the Quran, God says in a number of places that Satan has no authority over anyone except those who agree to follow him. So if you surrender your will to God and turn to God for protection, you may just get some whispering and suggestions that come as passing thoughts, but he has no authority over you.
All right, here's a more complex question, but one that's often wrestled with in a number of traditions. Since God has no gender, why not refer to God as she? After all, the word she includes he, as in S/HE, but the word he is smaller than the word she.
That's an interesting way of putting it. So going back to the point that I mentioned in the introduction, we said that God, Allah, is neither described as a he, or a she, nor she, nor neuter. And when we're speaking about God from the Islamic perspective, we frame that discussion in the Quranic terms, which are in Arabic. And because we're talking about Quranic terms in Arabic, we have to look at Arabic. The word for God in Arabic, Allah, we have also pronouns, which is huwa. Huwa literally means he. But Arabic is not like English. We don't have it in Arabic. It's a gendered language. Every thing, every object is either going to be a he or a she. This is a book, kitab. We would say, huwa al-kitab, this is the book, all right? Huwa kitab, it is a book. So we translate it as it is a book, but I use the word huwa, which is literally he is a book. What is feminine here? He has a watch. That's called sa'a, and sa'a is feminine. So I would say hiya sa'a. Literally, she is a watch. Does that mean that it has the proper number of chromosomes to be a she, or for the book? No. It's just that Arabic is a gendered language, so there's no third option. So God is referred to as huwa, as he, and we say he in English as well, not because we believe that God has a gender or even neuter, but because language is limited. It is trying to use limited language to express the one who is unlimited. So you have to acknowledge the limitations of language from the very beginning. That said, in Islamic theology, when we talk about God, we have other words to describe the divine. One of them is that or that al-aliyah. And that translates as the divine essence, right? The essence of God, the divine entity. And the word that is feminine. But again, it's not because we believe that God is female. Just as we say huwa, he, doesn't mean he is male. Likewise, if we say that for entity or essence, we're not affirming that he's a female. Gender is a quality of created beings, and God doesn't have the quality of created beings.
Okay, what do Muslims believe about the Messiah?
Nice question. How many of you knew that Muslims believe in Jesus? Right. How many of you know?
I learned that from you.
Oh. How many of you know that Muslims believe that Jesus, the Messiah, will also return? So we also believe that. Jesus is unique among the prophets. On one level, all of the prophets are equal. On one level. On the level of their unifying message. God tells us in the Quran in one verse that one should not try to draw a distinction and a divide between the prophets and messengers sent by God, which means that we don't try to honor one or dishonor one in order to honor another. Nevertheless, they do have a hierarchy. Some of them were among the most formidable of prophets, and others had relatively minor roles compared to those prophets. The formidable prophets in the Quran are 5. They are Abraham, they are Moses, they are Jesus, they are Muhammad, and they are, who did I miss? Noah. These are ulul azmi min ar-rusul. They are the prophets of great resolve. Their missions required a lot. Other prophets lived in small communities and we don't even know about them. Jesus is one of these major prophets in the Islamic tradition because he came in the latter period. And we believe that the latter period, we are in the latter period. I mean, everyone says that at every generation, at the end of time. But we really are. And he came as the final prophet to speak about the Prophet Muhammad, who we believe is the final prophet, whose message was universal and not restricted to a particular nation or people. We believe that, but we don't believe that Jesus was crucified. We believe he is a prophet as a human being. He was in need of God. We don't believe that he was a part of God, coexisting with God. We believe that he was a creation of God, and needy of God, and that at the same time he wasn't crucified. Rather, he was taken into a spiritual realm and preserved, and in that realm he remains until God sees fit to bring him back to earth in the latter period when he will be with different believers and battling who we believe to be the Antichrist figure. The Antichrist, we also believe in that person too. We say Antichrist in the Islamic tradition is maybe a little different than the Christian conception. The word Antichrist in Arabic, al-Masih al-Dajjal, literally means the false or the imposter anointed one. So he is masquerading or pretending to be an anointed Messiah or leader for human beings. And we believe that what makes him an imposter is that he's taking gross materialism and by inverting morals makes that to be the supreme virtue, which is the polar opposite virtue of Jesus, which was he was a major renunciate, very otherworldly and ascetic in his practice, and he will present an alternative which is in the polar extreme opposite of materialism and degradation. Anyhow, enough for eschatology.
Yes.
So he's honored. In fact, we have one narration from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which mentions that he will be buried next to him. And today, if you go to Medina, where the Prophet Muhammad is buried, you can't really see inside of the tomb area, but adjacent to the grave of the Prophet Muhammad is an empty area for where he is to be buried. So we have a very strong relationship with him as an honored prophet of God.
Our final question is from the cards. Do you feel Muslim leaders, quote, call out, unquote, radical Muslims appropriately?
Yeah. So I want to share with you something. I brought something for that. Okay. So there's an article in The Guardian, the British newspaper or magazine, that was released a couple of years ago about this young girl. Well, she was 19 in university here in the U.S. And in her class, they were having a discussion on the Crusades. And someone in the class said to her, he said, not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. What's more, he complained, not enough Muslims were making a stand against terrorism. So this young girl, she was so fed up with hearing this that she went online and created a Google spreadsheet, going through Google and pulling out all of the condemnations, all of the statements, all of the articles, all of the symposiums, all of the references where Muslim imams, scholars, organizations, mosques, you name it, spoke out against groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other nutcases. The spreadsheet grew to 712 pages, and she put it online. You can actually go there. So she said Muslims are held to a different standard than other minorities. 1.6 billion people are expected to apologize and condemn terrorism on behalf of a couple of dozen lunatics. It makes no sense. After all, Hashmi says, I don't view the KKK or the Westboro Baptist Church or the Lord's Resistance Army as accurate representations of Christianity. I know that they're on the fringe. So it gets very frustrating having to defend myself and having to apologize on behalf of some crazy people. So there's actually a fallacy called the spotlight fallacy, where people only, what they receive through the media becomes the only representation of a certain group. So if they see incidents happening here and there in different parts of the world through radical groups, organizations, terrorists, they begin to associate that as the norm because they're not exposed. And unfortunately, Muslims have a role to play in this too, and that's because we don't always reach out to our neighbors. We don't get to know people like we should. If you have a Muslim neighbor, someone you've worked with and you know them for some time, you know, you're human beings. And that it's not fair for people to be held, 1.6 billion people to be held accountable for the actions of a fringe minority. But in terms of calling out radical Muslims appropriately, that may be different from the question of whether it's happened or is happening enough. Is it being done appropriately? I believe it is being done appropriately for the most part. But people need education. Appropriately, in terms of educating people about the nature of Islam, what Islam stands for, and representing Orthodox Islam, normative practice of Islam, as opposed to these fringe sectarian groups that number in the thousands, because some people think that they are representative of orthodoxy, that they represent the standard way that Muslims should be. And as one of my friends, a fellow Imam, once said, he said, if that was really Islam and Muslims are really hell-bent on doing the kind of things that they're doing, there's 1.6 billion of us. It would have been a lot more. But thankfully, they're a fringe minority, and Muslims have been the biggest recipients of those maniacs. They have been the biggest victims of terrorist attacks. And so I think appropriately we could look at different ways of reaching out and speaking to people. I think personally the best way to counter these things is simply to get to know people on a human level. Co-workers, classmates, neighbors, because when you know someone in a good way and you see that stuff in the news, that doesn't represent the faith because you have experience with people. But if you live in a neighborhood with no Muslims, if you don't go to school with Muslims, if you've never interacted with them, all you have to base your judgment on is what's being presented to you, which is why it's so dangerous to, just limit ourselves to one source and not get to know people.
Well, thank you. Part of the yes, we're going to open it for a few questions,
Sure.
But part of the purpose of this is to do exactly what the Imam has said, to get to know our neighbors and sisters and brothers in a new way. Yes, please.
I have two words, predestination, and I think you were talking a little bit about that, so I was wondering how, and also free will.
Free will, yeah. So Muslims, we do believe in free will, but it is free will such that God knows what we're going to do, but we're also responsible for making the choices. It is a complicated theological discussion, and there's a lot that would need to be unpacked to get a firm grasp. But even that firm grasp is with an understanding that it is speaking about the knowledge of God. So we have no access to the knowledge of God, but we do believe in free will. And it would be completely inappropriate for a person to believe that they are compelled by God. We don't believe in fatalism. If someone was to use the argument that they are compelled by God because God wills all things, well, we tell them, if that's the case, then don't eat food, don't drink water, don't do anything, because if you're going to be fed, if you're going to be sustained, God will do it because God wills it. We'll see how long they sit there before they go look for a sandwich. So people who use God's decree as a kind of an argument or an excuse usually use it for excusing their own laziness and moral behavior. They don't use it for food and drink. So it's really a cop-out. We don't believe that we are like leaves blowing in the wind. Nevertheless, we believe in God's pre-eternal knowledge, that God has knowledge of all beings, all things at all times. That means that even before, we all have a beginning in creation. Like, there was a time when we didn't exist, and then we came to exist. But God's knowledge of us has no beginning and no end. Like, when you think about that, it means the idea of you in God's knowledge has been eternal. Now, God created us in a certain moment in time, and there's a reason why He created us now and not in another time. We may not know the answer to that until maybe later on, right? In the hereafter, we could ask those questions. So there's the balance between affirming that belief in God's knowledge and will and understanding our own role and responsibility as human beings with moral accountability.
Are there any other questions? Yes. Well, I see no other hands, so well, if I see another hand, I'll have to call on that person. But go ahead, fire away.
You kind of Islam, Muslim, same or no?
So the word Muslim is a subject noun for the one who practices Islam. So Salima is your root letters, the three root letters. Islam is your second form verb, and the noun that comes from that verb would be Muslim. So Muslim is the one who practices Islam, who identifies Islam as their way of life, their faith. Yeah.
Yes.
If there are prophets that are unknown to the faith, what is it that is like the determination that Muhammad is the final prophet? Why is he accepted as it when you know that there are unknown prophets as well?
Right. So when we say that we have a general belief in prophets and a specific belief in prophets, we mean we believe in the specific prophets mentioned in the Quran by name and their roles and what happened in their lives. And we have a general belief in the prophets that they are these messengers that are chosen by God. It's not something that they've earned through their own effort. It's bestowed by God. And there were many through different nations, many of whom we don't know. And the general belief is that they are a group among human beings that existed. But in our belief regarding the prophets, we also believe that they are kind of a community unto themselves. And as a community unto themselves, we believe that they have a leader. They're not a leaderless group, so to speak. So we believe that that leader would be the final one, who was the culmination of the message of all the prophets, and whose message is universal in the latter period of humanity, where the world will increasingly become more and more globalized. And therefore we believe that he is the final prophet. If a person believes, because some may say, well, I believe that the Prophet Muhammad is a prophet, but I don't believe that he's the final prophet. And the general response would be, the Prophet Muhammad himself has communicated, has recited the verses of the Quran that God revealed to him, and said with his own tongue that he is that final messenger, the last in a long series of messengers. So it's impossible for a person to believe that he is a messenger while at the same time believing that another one will come after him, because he's already said that he is the final one. And that's why we believe that he's the final one. Well,
Yes.
Not so much a question as an observation that might lead to a question. Going back to the question of why Muslims are expected to apologize for the actions of a small minority, which is essentially a question of Islamophobia.
right.
I would just observe that Islamophobia doesn't exist in a political vacuum. It serves an ideological function, which is to justify an agenda of empire building. That goes back centuries and it still exists now. It justifies and rationalizes Western aggression against the world.
And I think we can all agree that religion in general, regardless of the faith tradition, religion is a force of great good, and it can also be a force of great evil, especially when religion is used, or when people piggyback on religion to justify political ambitions for gaining territory and wealth and control over others. Oftentimes, religion is basically used as that means because it's very influential in people's lives. In a place where religion doesn't have any real value, you can't use religion to motivate people to do something that's horrible. But if religion is really important in people's lives, it can be used and manipulated to get people to do something that it has nationalistic or racist objectives behind it, if that makes sense. So when we talk about religion, it is a force of great good. It can also be a force of great evil when we use religion not as a way of bettering ourselves and getting closer to God, but using it as a mask for our own ego. And that's one of the great challenges of religion, that religion is supposed to make us better people, but we all know the stereotype of the holier-than-thou person, right? Where religion becomes a way of projecting the ego onto others. So I can't be better than you in this, so I'll be better than you and judge you based on religion. I'm more pious than you. I'm more observant than you. And that's all ego. And religion, at its best, is supposed to train our ego, to purify our ego and refine it so it becomes close to God. And with the taintedness of ego and narcissism removed from it.
Yes.
What are the closest mosques we might visit?
There's only one mosque here. So there's the mouthful, MCCGP,
Right.
the Muslim Community Center of Greater Pittsburgh.
It's been given the address.
That's two.
You know, Monroeville Center, romantic brothers,
The white building
big white building.
behind the CVS.
Yeah, so you go straight on that road, there's Monroeville church there, and all that straight to the left. That's
There's a sign, but it's very hidden.
Great Seaman Lane.
You go out the old part of Northern Pike on the side, and then you make a left. You have a website, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the Imam said there's a website and you can get lists of various. All right, if there are no other questions before we show our appreciation to the Imam, we're meeting again November 7th. Rabbi Simons, who coordinates these, do you know the topic? Okay.
They're talking about the speaker?
Yes.
Program like this?
Yes.
Will be the Baha'i.
Oh, okay, the Baha'i faith will be featured for the next topic.
November 7th.
Did you want to say anything about the November 21st panel too, or not?
Yes, I would like to say something about the November 21st panel. So our panel, which consists of all of the various faith traditions that are part of the Monroeville Interfaith Ministerium, will be on November 21st at 7 o'clock in this room. And it is on mental health, including suicide, from our different faith perspectives. So we welcome you to come to that.
And as I mentioned earlier, as we are looking ahead, this was before the rabbi came in, if you have suggestions for future panels, please share those with Rabbi Simons and we will endeavor to respond as best we can. Let us show our appreciation to and thank you all for coming. We hope to see you next time around. You can keep those if you'd like.
Softball question.